independent scholar, and she is hails out of Georgia and has been working in the puppetry community for years. We've been working on the Symposium. It's like the fifth one or sixth one we've done together. So, which has really been an excellent collaborator, and she has put together known for having put together an exhibition at the Ballard called Living Objects, African American Puppetry. And that was a wonderful exhibit that was there for a while. And she also did another one, a traveling exhibit called The Wonderland Puppet Theater, that if you were here yesterday, you heard her talk about it. And of course, there's her book as well that came out a few years ago, Object Performance in the Black Atlantic, which is a great contribution to a missing part of the history of puppetry in the United States and in this region of the world. And she's going to go ahead and start the morning off. So without further ado, I pass it over to Paulette.
Thank you, Blair. Oh, good, the mic is on. And thank you all for getting up early on a Sunday morning and coming out in the cold to attend our symposium. Our theme for this year is puppet dramaturgy. In other words, how does telling stories with objects differ from regular theatrical dramaturgy? I came to this topic after reading Claudia Orenstein's excellent book, Reading the Puppet Stage, which is one of the only sources I know of that considers specifically puppet dramaturgy. And I think we're fortunate to have Claudia somewhere in the audience this morning. Okay. So the title of this session, Humans and Objects, is drawing from one of the chapters in her book, and we will be looking at the relationship between humans and objects as highlighted by object performance. We always come to this question in our symposium from one angle or another. It's been more metaphysical in the past, but today we'll be considering how it impacts the storytelling. So we have four brilliant panelists. They're going to introduce themselves. So I'll just pass the mic, well, fit metaphorically down to Gildwen Peronno.
Who I am?
Yes, who you are, what your show is, and anything else you want to tell the audience about yourself.
Hello, my name is Gildwen Peronno. I apologize because my English is not very well, but I will try to speak English. And if ever I have some problem, I will ask some help. So I play a performance. The show is I Killed the Monster. It is an object theater, and I am come from France, and the name of the company is Roisiseau Théâtre. It's good?
Yeah.
I'm Pam Arciero. I directed Aanika's Elephants, which played the last couple of days here. I am a puppeteer. I've worked on Sesame Street for over 40 years, as well as the artistic director of the National Puppetry Conference at the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center in Waterford, Connecticut. I've been around puppets for a really long time.
My name is Choiti. I represent an organization called Tram Arts Trust. We come from New Delhi, India. And the show that we are performing here is called Maati Katha. Maati Katha translates to English as Earth Stories. Earth as in clay or mud or the world. Earth Stories. We perform next week on the 21st and 22nd, and it's a object and material theater performance.
Hello, my name's Alex. I am a member of the theatre company called Tortoise in a Nutshell. Our piece, Concerned Others, has been playing for the last 2 days at the Instituto Cervantes and has got 2 more shows today. I'm based in Edinburgh, in Scotland, and our company has been making and creating work there for the last 15 or so years, as well as making and creating work across different places in Europe and North America as well. Thank you.
These are our panelists. We actually have one mic. We
Yeah,
have three
right.
mics
Share
up
that,
there.
we share.
Yes, but, share and share alike. That's a good spirit. All right, so I will open us with a quotation from page 98 of Orenstein's book. Puppetry is always offering us opportunities to think about how we place ourselves vis-a-vis the things around us, those that we make and with which we create, and those that we find in nature. So the first question, and we're going to do this down the line, one question, come down the line, next question. The first question is, if you had an unlimited budget for actors and sets, could you tell this story without the objects?
Okay. I will read, but I could indeed tell the same story with different actors or on sets, but in the end, it wouldn't be quite the same story for me. In my shows, I use object as a play partner and not simply props. They enable to meet they enable me to illustrate place, characters, and sometimes even sensation. Each object is carefully chosen to complement and augment the story. Each object is carefully chosen to complement. Each, sorry. Yeah, so excuse me. Each object is carefully chosen and to provide a sense of discrepancy, humor, sensitivity, and poetry. Each object must make sense of the story. Object and their manipulation can express things that would take a long time to transcribe in words for me. Perhaps there is a photo, a picture?
Yes, I have.
1.2? Yes.
You want 1.2?
Yes, please. In this picture, I play with a mask because I want to express the sensation of the character who is different. You need a mask to. How do you say that? Yeah, to respirate in our world. Do you understand that?
Yes.
So I use this mask to express that. For me, the object theater calls on the spectator's intelligence and capacity for imagination. I think it's stimulating for the spectator. Visually, the visual inverse I propose is fairly poor with just a few objects. Faced with this simplicity, the imagination is activated for me. It's a real challenge at a time when we are. Oh, sorry, the word is.
Inundated.
By the multitude of images of our strain. Without object, I don't think the viewer's journey will be the same. I would activate all the sensory chords, and it's like in the kitchen with identical ingredients. You can end up with very different dishes. Sorry for my English.
It's great. Great metaphor.
An unlimited budget is a fascinating idea, right? Because then you can do anything. But I mean, if I was to take our show, which is about elephants and a little girl's memory of growing up with elephants, and we did it in the real world, we could do that. We could have real elephants. We could have them all, have her working in the orphanage with them and training with them. But for me, it's sort of the difference between a photograph and a painting, right? It's an actual photograph of an elephant. But a painting could be 4 lines that represent an elephant. And that's what I feel we try to do with our show. Our elephants are sketches of what an elephant is, and you fill in the gaps. And we've had people come up and say to us, you know, the back of those elephants was amazing. And I go, there are no backs to our elephants. They are only the front view. There you see some of them. And literally, I feel like it's her memory. It's sketches of the memory she has of what she did and went through, her time at the orphanage, of running into the bush with these elephants and developing that special relationship. What happens in reality is you'd be more, for me as a director, I'd be very concerned about getting exactly the right view of the elephant, or having to find a trained snake to attack her at some point. I mean, there are things about it that would be much more complicated to do with an unlimited budget in a realistic way, in a film kind of idea. You know, there's something about having budget constraints that enable you to think more imaginatively, I feel, that I don't have you know, it's the structure that gives you a sense of play. There's a certain freedom in knowing what your limits are. Unlimited freedom sometimes is overwhelming, and you can't quite figure out where you want to go next. And I feel with Aanika, particularly our designer, Martin Robinson, just incredible, using all natural materials. And our writer did a great job of filling this all in for us. It was much more joyful for me to think about doing it in terms of the black stage, in terms of bringing the feeling to people without giving them a real elephant, without making them feel a real snake is being attacked. There is a lot of joy for me in that I'm making your imagination work with me to tell this story.
I had the opportunity to see the piece in workshop, and if I remember correctly, there was at that point an elephant butt, which
Yes, there was.
the cast members.
We did have an elephant butt. We had this idea about the elephant walking into the distance, and the actors would fake walking with them, and you would see them disappearing, but it never worked. So we got rid of it.
Okay, great. Yes, Choiti.
I was, maybe we could watch the trailer of
Sure.
the show, because we are the only show on this panel who hasn't performed yet.
Yeah.
So just to give you a reference of what we're going to be talking about.
Islands across a watery world, scattered. Look, so many colorful people in our Sundarban.
The forest is always watching.
Raju and Altaf, the very bestest of friends. Fishing challenges, races, jokes, their banter never ends. Presenting Tukhe Jatra, the adventures of Tukhe. Hold on, Tukhe! There is a big wave coming!
Pathao দুঃখেরে আমার সনে মরদের জঙ্গলে দলে বলে কেটে পড় রেখে দুঃখেরে আমার কাছে
Looks like there's a big storm coming.
জল জঙ্গল মাটি দিয়ে গড়ায় আমার ঘর রে দয়াল ভাষাইলি কোন ভাটির পর রে দয়াল ভাষাইলি কোন ভাটির পর মাটি কাদায় রাখলো সনাতন সুন্দরবনে পাইলাম কোন নতুন দর্শন ভালোবেসে হাত বাড়িয়ে করো রে যতন যতন বিনে ভয়ঙ্করী হতে কতক্ষণ হতে কতক্ষণ So to answer the question, if we had unlimited budget, could we tell this story with actors and sets and no objects? So as you see, the dolls from the show, so the show emerged from a research project that we've been doing for the last few years. And the research is documenting and archiving the stories that surround the traditional and contemporary doll arts of West Bengal, which is a state in the eastern part of India bordering Bangladesh. The dolls that you see in the show come from Sundarbans. They have been made by artists from Sundarbans with clay from the region, and they tell the stories of their land. Every material in our journey in creating this show, we learned that every material has its own philosophy. Many of you would have seen the show with ice anywhere. Water, ice has its own philosophy. Similarly, clay has its own philosophy. And this philosophy can be very culture-specific. It can also be very universal. I think there is nobody in this room who does not have a connection to earth, to clay, to soil. It can be a very deep-rooted connection. It can also be cultural. This philosophy seeps its way into the show so strongly. And it is also this philosophy that resonates with the lifestyle and the stories of the people of Sundarbans. And when you see the show, you'll feel the very deep connection between the philosophy of Maati, of clay, the philosophy of the land that the story is coming from, and the wider context of the world that we all live in, on how to survive on this planet, really. And it's this intrinsic mix of the philosophy which is very deeply rooted in the material that the dolls are made from and the material that the show is told with. This particular play would be impossible without this clay. It would be impossible without these dolls. Any dolls would not do. I could not pick up dolls from Delhi or clay dolls from anywhere else. It would have to be clay dolls from Sundarbans to tell this particular story. because it's not because it's not just objects that we are working with. These are objects that are endowed and laden with a lot of cultural, universal, personal resonances. A lot of they're very heavily endowed objects, and the material itself, as we all know, clay is a very heavily endowed material. So this show would be completely impossible without these particular objects and materials. But interestingly, when we were brainstorming yesterday about these questions, I am only speaking for my whole team. I'm only representing because all the responses we've brainstormed together. And we were thinking about, so it's interesting that we bring the dolls from Sundarbans when we are doing the show, but we go and take clay from the place that the clay that we use in the show is from Chicago. So if the dolls need to come from Sundarban, why not the clay? And I think it's the dolls, and it was a very interesting question. It's the dolls that provide the cultural, contextual rooting of the play, but it's the clay that makes that rooting universal. Why should a story from Sundarban be important for you to hear? It's because of the material that belongs to you here in Chicago, or in France, or in New York, or in Scotland. Also, this, don't go by the scale of this show. This is not a small budget production. We could have had actors if we wanted to. It's impossible to do this show in any other format than what you see. Yeah.
Yeah, that is an excellent answer, and thank you for thinking so deeply about the question. Great. Alex?
Hello. If I had an unlimited budget, I would go quite quickly mad. I don't think I would know where to even start. I think I really resonate with your point around actually an unlimited resource is not helpful. That constrictions on resource is a really fun creative challenge, I think, for a start point. In relation to concerned others, for anyone who's seen the piece or not seen the piece, it's a series of, well, it's a story really about people's lived experience of substance addiction and substance recovery in Scotland. So rather than actually maybe the question being about could you tell your story without the objects, I think the big question we spent a lot, maybe about 6 months thinking about is, should we tell this story at all? Are these accounts, are these people's testimony? Should we be trying to communicate and present those through this medium at all? That was 6 months of work for us, and speaking to people from all across the recovery community in Scotland and getting their perspective on that and their feeling on that. A big kind of part of the philosophy of our work is to recognize that we don't really know anything. And to pick ideas where actually we become expert through the process of making. We're quite proud generalists in that sense, which maybe makes us a little bit different in terms of how we approach working with puppets and items and objects. We kind of grow interested and discover the right objects for a piece through quite long development periods, working with different ideas and kind of become expert that way, we hope anyway. So yeah, rather than could you tell, it was definitely about should we tell with this story. The more we spoke to people, the more we understood the perspectives and just level of knowledge that people had about their own lives and the systems they have to engage with as individuals caring for people who are going through substance recovery. The scale of injustice, the scale of marginalization is huge and has been huge for a very, very long time. So we were really aware straight away that we were dealing with people who had a lot of things that they really wanted other people to have the chance to consider or have like a unit of time where they could just have their voice heard. So that became the focus of what our piece was about. How do we pass on the expertise and knowledge that we've had this really lucky chance to sit and hear from people. How do we pass that on? And that's where our kind of relationship of creating work through items and objects, that's where that begins. For us, being able to create work in this way, we're really interested in the capacity of our imagination as individuals, but also as a collective. That kind of moment that happens in a theatre performance where a collective sense of imagining can be fostered, where you're maybe 100 people sitting in a room together with a performer, and we can all be given that chance to just stop and think for a little while. It's very hard to get that chance in our day-to-day life. So I think that's why we look to items and objects as much as we do, because of how much imaginative capacity they have, how much it doesn't just allow us to be here, but here and here as well. And that felt really important for the stories that we were trying to communicate and trying to pass on. So yes, we could do this story with an infinite budget, and yes, you could just do a documentary version of it where you get the amazing chance essentially to have the experience that sort of I had making the piece, which is going and interviewing about 60 odd people and hearing them talk for an hour each. But that would be a very different piece, and it's not could, it's should you do the piece that way, I think. That makes sense.
Great, thank you. Once again, I appreciate the considered answers that all of you gave. So we can move on to the second question, which is, how does the relationship between the puppeteers and the material characters, that is puppets, masks, performing objects, frame the relationship between human beings, other living creatures, and the natural world? Back to Gildwen.
Thank you. For me, object theater is a technique that does really reflect, doesn't really reflect the relationship between humans and other living creatures. If it does, it will be through the story that is told. Objects remain rather inert compared to puppets for me, from a manipulation point of view. Object theater, on the other hand, conveys a political point of view. I appreciate and demand sobriety in the production of my shows. I work with unprocessed objects from consumer society. Old toys, my sister, 35 years old, dinettes. Do you understand that? Dinettes? Dinettes. It's a toys and a clock that no longer works, a pair of shoes I have found. Often these are discarded objects destined for the garbage can or landfill. In a way, it's proposing an alternative to today's ultra-technological consumerist world. In my next creation, I would like to talk especially about this, our relationship with living things, with the world around us, on what we do with it, using mainly natural materials, on trying to transform them. I would like to take the risk of being even more minimalist and go back to the source by manipulating only carbon. Do you understand? The truck branches, oil, coal, diamonds, and how can we paint a portrait of a new world capable of putting the living at the distance?
That's great. So this is a show then that's in production and germination in your mind? Oh, well, I hope you'll be back to present it here. Yes. Okay, Pam.
Work in progress.
We did work with natural materials, and in fact, I think the first workshop, there were some branches that were brought in to be trees that still had living items in it. We had to, wait, is this a bug for real coming out of this branch? We as far as materials go, and I'm fascinated because when you talked about the philosophy of the material does really affect how you perform it. One of the nice things about rattan and what we have with our rattan characters is it has its own life and breath. And when you move it, somehow the character becomes fuller and becomes more because the material is helping to form the information of how that goes forward. And the philosophy of, she said philosophy of materials, and I went, wow, that's exactly right. That's what we do as puppeteers. We're taking materials and reforming it into our needs to make it live and breathe in whatever story we're choosing to tell. I really love the idea that the natural world is part of what we're doing. We're definitely coming from the natural world. It's not that we don't have wonderful materials that are from basically outer space, from the space program, from the plastics, from the different things that we've been using. But again, it totally informs how you're telling your story, right? It's giving you the format to move forward with by having those kinds of materials. I don't think I'd want to work with something else. We tried some plastic boning and different things, but the rattan, I think, and again, this is all Martin, just beautiful, beautiful ways of working with that stuff. Our tusks are not natural materials, but they are really good foam. So they're different aspects of how we combine our materials and what's moving forward and how we determine what our puppet is going to do, what our show is going to be about. It's fascinating for me.
Did you want to show your clip at some point?
Oh, yeah. For those who didn't see it, this would be a great time to show the clip.
Okay. This one? All right.
But in here, I am an elephant.
Now, read me one of your mama's stories.
Okay. A door in the earth, hot or land. As the spider was about to pounce, the ant said, "My, what a beautiful trapdoor you have." Those first few days were precarious for Little. That is what I began calling her, Little. And soon everyone was calling her Little. Ready, set, go! Yay, Little! You did it!
So, are you becoming a storyteller like your beautiful mama?
No, I can only read them, not to make them up like her.
How would you know? Ever try?
This should be enough. Thank you, Uncle. Papa took us on many journeys as Little grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. Let's see if we can find the trapdoor spider. Let's find pictures of the stars. That could be antelope head. With us, because I am an elephant.
Thank you. So you can see the rattan move and breathe as the elephants become bigger and bigger and bigger. And again, because it's a memory play, that's also why the parental figures in the play are basically hats and gloves and affectations, because they're, in your memory, things aren't perfect. And that's part of the reason I love using the materials we use. It's your imagination filling in the rest of all of that to tell this story. Besides Aanika, our real actor, little girl person. I love that combination.
Thank you, and it's very effective. Okay, Choiti?
This question sort of requires us to give away our whole story. So it's the very question that we've been asking from the beginning of the show, the relationship between the puppet and the puppeteer, and the relationship between the human and the non-human, and the natural world. There are two questions that the show revolves around, thematically around this premise. There are two questions that constantly kept coming up while we are making the show, and even when we are playing today, every day. The two questions of status or hierarchy and identity. When we are talking about puppet and puppeteer, and the human world, and the human and the other, let's say. The show particularly, I think we use the opportunity of the show to play with the question of status, to play with the question of hierarchy, of who has power when and for how long. So throughout the show we are, and it's a conscious, consistent, every show, every time, it's an endeavor to problematize and to play with this notion of hierarchy and status within the show, between the performer, between the human performer, and with the material and with the dolls. There is a constant oscillation. It's a seesaw that we keep doing with the show. I don't really have a lot to say on this. The only other thing that I would like to say is, when we are talking about identity, we often say for the puppeteer, the puppet is, therefore I am. The puppeteer exists because the puppet is there, because the puppet exists. And the people of Sundarbans, who live in very close proximity with the forest, with the natural world, and that's why their story is very important, also because they're at the forefront of everything that the rest of the world does ecologically and climatically. They say, and they live in very close, it's not just proximity, it's an intermingling of life. You know, there is really not much separation between what we call Jal Jangal Zameen, which is the forest, the water, and the earth, and the human and the animals. There is not much separation. And it's a very simple philosophy, and they have nailed it so well. They say the forest exists, therefore I exist. If there is no forest, there is no me. It's very simple, but I think we often forget that we too are part of the natural world. The more towards the cities that we go, the more distanced we become from the natural world. But you cannot, no? So it's a complex and a very intertwined relationship, I think, between the puppeteer and the natural and the human and the non-human world. That's, yeah.
Okay, so in the image that we have up at present, could you describe a little bit what is the identity of some of the figures and their relationship? We see the greenery, so their relationship to the natural world.
The identity of the...
Yes, you talked about identity and status, so if you could, like, for example, this woman here.
Yeah.
what can you tell us about her?
Well, she's introduced in the show, you know. Yeah. They're all introduced in the show. I would have to perform the first scene.
Okay, all right, we won't ask you to do that. Are these figures commissioned and crafted for your show, or they are found
okay,
objects?
that's a great question. That's a great question. So these dolls are made largely for three purposes. One is for worship. They're not these particularly, but there are other dolls within the same genre that are created for worship traditionally. Some are created for children to play with. Some of these are created for children to play with, and these are the traditional reasons why dolls were created in Bengal. And the third, which is a newer entrance in the genre, is for display. So these dolls are not made for the theater at all. This is the first time that they have entered the theater as performers. So these dolls, you know, when we entered Sundarbans and we went to the doll makers' homes, a lot of these are traditional arts, and a lot of the traditional arts had been wiped out because of annual cyclones. These particular artists had almost stopped making because there's hardly any sales, they break, plus they can't compete with plastic toys. So we asked them, they only make these are traditional arts, but they'd only make when they're asked to now, because it's a dying genre. This particular, there are thousands of styles and genres of doll arts in Bengal. This is just one of them. The really old ones go back to the Indus Valley civilization, 5,000 years, continuing unchanged in technique and material. This particular genre is under threat, it's under pressure. They made them again after about 4 years. Because we asked them to, we told, and now because of this show, there has been a revival of the. So now they get a little bit more commissions. Wherever in India we go to perform, we try and bring them with their sales counter. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, Alex, you ready?
Hi. This is, I guess, a tough question in some ways when it comes to thinking about the piece that we've brought to the festival. There's the central core kind of purpose of our piece, in a way, is that there's a national crisis in action in Scotland that's been with our country for a long time. And when you're starting with that as the start point of an idea, then the first thing that was in my head was just fear. Fear of getting it wrong, of making something exploitative, of making something that didn't help advocate for people, that didn't help with the issue, but rather hindered. When you're tackling a piece that talks to the experience of people who have lost loved ones, that comes with a real sense of responsibility. And in a way, one of the first and sort of most useful conversations someone had with me was to sort of a really good exercise in decentering and just saying, get out of your own head with this a little bit. It's not your responsibility to carry this. You're a very, very, very small part in the wider sense of advocacy that's been running for decades to help represent the cause of people who've been pushed to the fringes of the society and community that you live in. And that was really helpful. It was a really, really helpful thing. And that then meant we could start to think more carefully about those choices around, okay, so we have these amazing testimonies from these incredible people, and we have hours and hours of it. So how now do we start to think about framing those testimonies visually? And the more we listen to the voices, the more we sort of realize that actually the voices are so much of the story and carry so much of the experience that really our images are there to just help support and help frame. And we kind of hit across this structure of a series of sort of 4 or so short vignettes, almost, telling sort of different aspects of the wider experience around substance recovery and addiction in Scotland. It felt really important to us that the materials we should use should be very minimal, that they should provide a lot of imaginative space, that there should be a kind of cleanness to the show, to the idea. And that really talked to that idea of not making something that in any way felt emotionally exploitative or attempted to shock in any way. There's so much content around substance addiction that attempts to shock. And we were really, really opposed to that. And we really wanted to make something that felt really sensitive and listened to the needs of people rather than spoke at the needs of people or felt like it was pushing an idea in any way. The idea is really simply to just create a unit of time for people to sit and consider the idea. So that talks to the materials we ended up using in that way. It's a lot of simple paper, a lot of simple card. We work with miniature a lot because I think there's something about miniature that we really love in all of our work, and how it functions as a mirror to our own world. It's just one step removed from our own world enough to provide an instant point of imaginative inspiration for us. It's also really hard to make and time-consuming, which sort of adds a level of patience to your process as well, which I think was really, really helpful. I think that's all I should say before I keep waffling too much.
So in circles that address trauma, there's often a notion of holding space for people who have experienced trauma to express their stories in a space that's safe for them to do that, or just to sit with the emotions, which often people have had to shove down just so they can keep going on with their lives. Would you say that the constructed world that you have for your show is a way of holding space for the stories that you collected with the interviews?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was the aim, for sure. I mean, this image that we're looking at now, the structures of buildings are all based on buildings and structures from our home city. So for people who are resident there, they recognize those streets. Like, there's enough about that that's real for them to recognize their own life, the life that they walk through day to day. And it was about, through making those kind of decisions, holding up a mirror that's like a gentle and caring mirror to help people reflect on their lives and to give space and time. I think there's such a big risk in, like you're saying, asking people to replay trauma from their life through a theatrical form, and that was, again, something we worked really, really hard to try and avoid. And less about, actually, that's maybe a poor way of framing it. It's not working to avoid, you're working to create the opposite end of that experience. You're working to create something that feels like it's really holding someone's story in the way that they told it to you. And actually, the bit where we maybe developed a lot of sort of skill and knowledge was how to have conversations with people, empathetic conversations with people, and really exercise our kind of empathy muscle. And it was a really long process for us as well to kind of go through that. Yeah, if that's helpful.
So your performance is then like the tip of the iceberg that, the audience is not going to ever see all of the layers of work that led to the moment when we see the performance on stage.
Yeah, for sure. And there's, when other kind of ways that we've worked this project, we create a lot of community work as well and a lot of participatory arts work. So we've run lots of different sort of workshop programs with this. We work with a lot of different recovery communities and people who are at risk of homelessness communities as well, but also lots of different sort of groupings of people. We just concluded a project working with trainee midwives and looking at their experience of working with women going through early stages of pregnancy, but who are also in recovery from substance use and substance addiction. So that's kind of like a doubly marginalized group of people. So for us, a performance piece is part of it, but actually it's just one part of it. There's a much wider raft of work where we collaborate with a whole host of amazing people, and that's where the piece kind of has its true function, in a way, its true sort of social function.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So we have the third question, which is, how much distance does your show insert between the puppet and the human performer? So if you had a glove puppet, it's right there on your hand. If you have a shadow puppet, you have something in your hand, but what the audience is seeing is at a projected distance from your body. How much distance does your show insert between the puppet and the human performer, and what consequences does this distance have for the story?
One of the specificities of my object theater is precisely to play with this distance. For me, sometimes I will bite a distance with the object. For example, in this picture, we do a map. I don't know if you recognize, but this is America, North America. So there is it's very huge. And another example between myself and the reconstruction of a miniature village in I Kill the Monster, perhaps picture 1.1. And you can see the characters, the main character, and also his village. So it's for me there is a big distance, and in this case, this allow me to take one on the role of a storyteller. Sometimes I will try to put as little distance as possible between the object and myself. For example, I might embody a dog figurine sitting on a table and barking and growling me. Sometimes I abolish the natural boundaries between an object and myself. For example, I will walk directly on a map, a paper map of America. So it creates something. Do you understand? And this distance allows us to create meaning, poetry, and comedy.
Thank you.
Specifically, we worked with hooded puppeteers, which is sort of rare these days. People don't hood their puppeteers as often. Often you'll see their faces and their hands right there behind the puppet. We really wanted that distance. We really wanted to paint that picture of these visions living in the space of her memory, of her mind, and of your mind. That's what we were going for. So we do have a bit of distance from our puppeteers from the puppets when possible. Obviously, for manipulation reasons, they had to be right there very often. But that also allowed us to create, when Aanika wanted to be closer to things, she was able to come right in. There were no puppeteers blocking that view. And particularly because even our human characters aren't really there. There's a distance between their heads and their bodies, or their heads and their hands, whatever their hat or whatever we were creating in terms of a physical being. There's distance there. And again, for me, distance gives you time to think of other things. Distance allows your mind to fill in blanks and to open. I work in television, so it's sort of my bread and butter. And for me, television feeds you everything. You have to see everything with a video. You see every detail. It's hard to find things in a video that allow you space to think. It has to, it's baby food. You just keep getting fed it. You just keep getting fed the image and the sound. And what I love about theater is that distance, is the fact that we can allow you to have an open space where nothing happens for a moment. And you have to figure out what just happened and what's coming next. And we're not spoon-feeding you that information straight through. We are creating the distance for you to think, to stop, to think, to breathe, to move forward within the context of the intellectual information we're trying to pass to you, or the story we're telling, or the emotion we're trying to, evict from you. Evict? What is the word I'm thinking of? Not evict. But anyway, to develop from you. And the distance of our puppeteers, again, our ideal is that they're not there, We've done other shows where the puppeteer is intimate to the puppet, and the relationship there is helping to tell the story. This is not one of them. This one, we wanted that distance.
Great.
There is the physical distance that we are talking about. So it's a tabletop show. The performer is behind the table as a storyteller. 30% of the story is told by the storyteller, and the rest of it is visually created, communicated on the table. That is, even though we are very close to the table, but there is a very clear one world and another world that it starts with. But this gives us the opportunity to keep playing with this distance. So sometimes we enter and then we exit. Sometimes we enter the story, we exit the story, and the dolls do the same. Unlike in textbook object theater, where the objects never really gain a specific identity, the objects always remain objects. But in this show, the dolls are given names. They have a very specific identity sometimes. And they become puppets. They become object puppets. So constantly the distance that we started with, it allows us the potential to keep bridging it and making it, allows us to come closer and farther away. So constantly, both the puppeteers and the dolls play with multiple identities. Sometimes I'm inside the performance, sometimes I'm outside the performance. And the dolls also, sometimes they're the character that they have been introduced as, and sometimes they are just clay dolls. It's this distance that allows us to play with these multiple identities. So we are sort of oscillating between object and puppet, because object theater is very good at creating an objective distance which allows you to sort of take a bird's eye view, look from the outside, and the puppet is so good at embodying the human being. It brings you closer. So we are sort of oscillating between these two identities constantly. So yeah, that's my.
Thanks. I wanted to piggyback on that question for you, because I'm fascinated with your use of dolls, because I love dolls. And it's intriguing to me that you bring these dolls to life, even though they are not articulated. And so there isn't the kind of manipulation that we would normally associate with puppetry.
Yes, absolutely right. The dolls don't have mobile limbs, they are stiff, but they do come to life. They also become constantly dead again. They were brought to life because the identities that we give the dolls are very important. There are specific names that in the Indian context carry a lot of meaning. A story of friendship between two women, fisher women, called Durga and Salma. These two names in the Indian context are very, very important. Salma, as many of you would have heard, is a very Islamic name, is a Muslim name. Durga is the name of an Indian goddess, a Hindu goddess. A friendship between Durga and Salma today, in today's world, and in the Indian context also, is a very important friendship. So hence the embodiment of the dolls with human names, human characteristics was very, very important for this story. And this is also the reality of Sundarbans. It's probably one of the only regions in the world where people of different religions and faiths pray to the same God. Where a Hindu and a Muslim will together chant Allah, Allah and Hari Hari. Hari Hari is the Hindu chant. Allah, Allah is the Muslim, Islamic chant. Where people of different faiths together will chant Allah, Allah and Hari Hari together. So this embodiment was very, very important. But you cannot ignore the fact that they are clay dolls. So very occasionally in the play, Durga and Salma will be put together with super glue. That will also happen in the show. So they are constantly living two identities.
That's great. There's a quote in Claudia's book that says that puppet theater is really about the puppets striving to be alive.
Yeah. Sorry, can I just add one more thing? It would be a lie to say that this show is pure object theater. It is not. It is a mix of object theater and puppet theater, because also in the course of making this show, I think we realized that the philosophy that object theater stands on, the philosophy of objects, is way more fascinating for us than the pure technique of object theater. This dual identity that we were able to play with gave a richness to the performance that I think if we had stuck to, no, this is object theater, no, this is puppet theater, and they must not mix, and there is a very straight line, and this is musical theater, and this is physical theater, and this is mass theater, and this is that theater, that richness we could not have achieved if we were following these very straight lines.
That's great. Looks like Gildwen has a thought there. Can we put a pin in it and come back? Sorry? It looks like you have a thought there. Can we put a pin in it and come back, or will you lose it? Il paraît que tu as quelque chose, une pensée en tête en ce moment. Est-ce qu'on peut le mettre à côté pour le moment, ou tu vas pas oublier? Non, c'est bon. OK, c'est bon. OK. Alex, come on.
I won't talk. I'm really interested to hear your ideas, so I won't talk to you. I think one of the things I really like to imagine sometimes when making a piece of work is a series of dials in front of me. And one of those dials is definitely labeled distance. And instead, I think I really liked what you said about not being so interested in the technique and the rigidity of rules and genre rules. So sometimes being able to turn a dial during a show, during a performance, I find really exciting and really interesting to say, okay, at one moment we're going to be in the gloom, in the shadow behind this moment, and at another moment, actually, the presence of the puppeteer, the human figure, is really adding something to how we understand the moment of this story. With Concerned Others, it was a very obvious choice with the people that you're hearing talking through the piece, that the human performer on stage, which is me, shouldn't be in the primacy. We should be behind those stories. It's really the dramaturgical function is about facilitating those stories and those voices. But there are moments in the piece where, as a figure, the presence of an actual live person in front of you felt really important as a way of emphasizing the story, emphasizing the account that someone was making. So we would turn that dial and bring me more into the presence of what was happening in that moment. And I find thinking of dials a really fun thing because they're not switches. It's not a way of saying, I'm here, I'm not. There's always a way of moving on a continuum from one point to the other, and how the subtle changes that you can make and how big an impact they can have on the moment, the drama of that moment, I think are really, really huge. And once you start to get a lot of dials in front of you, it gets really confusing. There's one thing about that as an image. But yeah, I think that's all I'd say on distance for now.
Good. Good. So I'm going to come back to Gildwen before he forgets. On était sur la question de la distance et les théories de le théâtre de l'objet vis-à-vis le théâtre de la marionnette. Yes.
I appreciate your commentary because I do object theater with some kind of technique, some kind of minding, and but before I do puppet shadow, I do puppet, and for me it's good to see other show with mixed with a different technique. So I don't see your show, but I want. I see you have the same window of my we have two windows in your show or in my show. So how do you do with the window, le cadre? Comment on dit le cadre? Yeah.
Thank you.
Merci.
Excellent. So what you said there, then we're now we're through the questions that I had prepared, and we have about 15-20 minutes to have questions among the panelists, and I have the prerogative of asking the first one. So I'm going to link this question of distance to Alex. You actually triggered this, and I was thinking about it after I saw your show. You were saying that for you, this performance is about decentering yourself, and you do that to the extent that your own body is really only visible as a silhouette in the piece. And when the Catapult folks were discussing it in the van, we raised the question of whether the human body itself is sometimes a performing object. In contrast, Gildwen is acting in sometimes an exaggerated way throughout his piece. And so those are the two poles of your presence as a manipulator of the material, where you are removed and are almost part of the material itself, or you are presenting a persona within the space of the story. So if you would comment on that idea, that would be very interesting.
Yeah, I think I would go back to the point I sort of just made about the dial. It's never right or wrong. It's just about noticing what the impact is or what the difference is. For our story, it's not important to understand me, the person me. It is in moments important to understand the presence of a human, and that these are human stories, and to be able to see a real person being part of that kind of wider scenography of the piece was really important. And yeah, this image, I guess, is probably the image you're talking about, which is a moment in silhouette. And the way we use light in the piece is really, really important in terms of it's almost a kind of a character in its own right, really, the way that the light shifts through the table structure that we use in the piece. So yeah, I think we made a really clear choice to put ourselves really at that far end of that presence of human person or not. It's important that you do see these things being created and shifted and moved, but it felt really key that happens almost in the shadow, almost in the dark behind the story.
Yes, and for those who have not seen the show, this moment echoes the beginning where you are sketching almost a stick figure, and the series of sketches is then animated as like a cartoon, and then this character echoes the movements of that figure.
Yes, I should have said that, sorry, yes. Yeah.
Right, Gildwen.
Can I speak in French?
Oui.
And you can translate?
Yes.
Okay. Quand j'ai commencé le spectacle
When I started the show
en 2019,
in 2019,
yeah, je n'étais pas aussi expressif, je pense, dans les visages que je fais, parce que je fais beaucoup de visages.
okay, I wasn't as expressive with my face. Now I do a lot of emoting.
Et je pense qu'au fur et à mesure que je l'ai joué,
But little by little, as I was performing the piece,
et je me suis aperçu que dans la relation qu'il y avait avec le public, ça jouait.
I saw that it worked in the relationship that it had with the audience.
Et souvent, j'ai fait des variations. Est-ce que je joue, je caricature, ou des fois je fais des variations à cet endroit-là.
So sometimes I vary the performance, sometimes it's more caricatured.
Parce que des fois, en poussant encore plus loin, les gens comprennent mieux.
Yes, because sometimes in pushing it further, the audience understands even more.
Et des fois, je suis obligé de réduire ça.
But sometimes I'm also obligated to pull back.
Et je crois que le côté caricatural des personnages
I think the caricature side of the characters
me permet d'avoir plusieurs places, une place de narrateur et en même temps ce qui me permet de faire des dialogues plutôt qu'un monologue.
So it allows me to have several roles, the narrator, and also dialogue with other characters.
Mais peut-être que des fois je fais trop.
Again, encore?
Peut-être que des fois je fais trop. Intérieurement, je me dis souvent que j'en fais beaucoup trop.
But sometimes inside I feel like I'm doing too much.
Yeah.
That wasn't the case when I saw the show. Great. So are there any questions amongst the panelists that you would like to? Yes, please. Come on, Choiti.
I'm curious to know his other dials. I want to steal them.
There's loads. Oh gosh, I don't know. Like I think we find it's that thing of starting a project not knowing what we're doing, in a way, if you know what I mean. Because I've got so much respect, and I wish I had it. I wish I had craft in the way that I see performances, like your performance as you are describing it, the skill and the dexterity and your attention to work with objects in the beautiful way that you do. So that's kind of what I aspire to grow to with each piece that we make. And sometimes we get there, and other times, I don't know what I'm doing. But so I think we kind of find the important attributes with each project through the making of it. And distance was really key in this one. Scale was really important. Light was huge. Voice, like how present or not present voice should be. The soundtrack of the piece is really driven by breath and whispers. That's what a lot of the sound score of the piece is, but a lot of it's very subtle and in the background. So we wanted to sort of explore that and see how that kind of, what atmosphere and how that would sustain the kind of bubble of the piece around the audience as well, so that it kind of felt all joined. Speed is a big dial. How fast or slow. Like, but making them really simple really helps, I think, and trying to not over-intellectualize your decisions. Just be like, how quick is this moment? Let's try it at 18 different speeds and see what each one does.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we make shows by getting them wrong 500 times, and then hopefully we get it right the 501st.
And speed was very important in this moment.
Yeah.
So you're actually on a treadmill, yes?
Yeah, I'm running.
And we were wondering how you controlled that, because it gets faster and faster.
I wonder that too sometimes.
So is that your own leg power, or you have it? Oh, wow. Then that's a tremendous effort, because it's the end of the show, and it's really all out running for quite a long time.
Yeah, I used to be a track runner. So I think in some ways I've drawn back on my own sort of personal history in a way for that moment. But I'm getting older, and And I had really lucky, I'm a father of 3, and my baby boy was born this summer, so I'm really tired. So it's getting harder.
Great. Is there another question among the panelists?
I want to know how do you find the clay? Do you just go to people and say, go to their backyards and dig it up? I mean, how did you get clay in Chicago? It's like art store.
Blair found it.
Blair, always Blair.
We just, there are some things that we can't travel with.
Yeah.
And it also, the clay, it's important that it comes from the place where the show is being performed. So to build the connection between the dolls from Sundarban and the people of Chicago.
Understood. And how often do you play this show, and how many different kinds of audiences? Like, do you take it to schools and do it for children, or do you do it only in a theatrical situation?
No. The youngest that we've decided to play to is 12. We've tried with different age groups, and I think 12 years is what is the age that can sustain the length, and particularly the second half of the show, which becomes more and more allegorical and complex. But my favorite shows are when we go into the gullies. Gullies are lanes, back, what? Yeah, alleys, and there are many community centers in India that work with people who never watch theater, who don't, they're public libraries set up by individuals to bring literature, stories to communities. Those are my favorite places to perform in. In fact, the whole endeavor now with this show is to take it out of the cities, go into the tier 2 towns. In India, the towns are divided into tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, depending on the economic development. And the biggest tragedy of our lives is that the show has not performed in Sundarbans. It has not. It is very difficult to, it's difficult to take the show there. We hopefully in July, we go to Sundarbans. Yeah. But yeah, the artists who build the dolls have seen the show, but they've seen it in Bombay and in Delhi.
Thank you. Any other questions from the panel? No? Okay, thank you. Then we will open it up to the floor. There is a microphone down here on my right. And so if you have a question, please come up to the mic so that your voice will register in the live stream. We have an audience that's watching at home, and then we have a future audience that will watch on YouTube afterwards. Are there any burning questions from the floor? Or no one wants to get up? Oh, good. Here comes Colette.
So thank you. I mean, this is like my favorite conversation ever. I'm hearing all these patterns developing over these past 2 panels and the shows that I've seen this week. And one that's emerging today, you talked about distance, and something that I think about a lot in puppetry is what I call the duality of absent presence. Like, something that you only see in this kind of theater is the human being is present, of course. You have to be present, or else the objects and the material can't come to life. But you are also absenting yourself to different degrees and for different reasons, right? As Pam was saying, you know, kind of a total shadow absence for Aanika's elephants, but you're almost godlike in your production. You're a storyteller, and you're very large in comparison to your objects. You're a storyteller. You're also absenting yourself on purpose and decentering yourself for reasons. So that's all really beautiful, and I wanted to bring that up. But I also am hearing this this idea of play coming up in the background a little bit. Paulette, you have such respect for dolls and play and their relationship to objects. You've worked with children's theater and television for so long. And I wondered about this idea of an adult. I think I was talking with Grace yesterday about this a little bit, about adults playing, right? Adults playing with dolls, playing with miniatures. Your show, Concerned Others, reminded me of dollhouses and playing with dollhouses. You literally have toys in your show. So I just wondered if you could speak a little bit about this idea of adults playing.
Great. Who wants to take that first?
I think part of the reason we're puppeteers is because we're allowed to play with dolls and objects and turn them into something meaningful, which I think as children we do too, but that's discounted because you're a kid, right? When my Barbie was walking in my backyard, she was having a good life, okay? I mean, she was creating this whole world. And so as I grew older, you were no longer really, it was frowned upon to do that stuff unless you were doing puppets. I was able to create whole worlds in new places and play with them, and still do, I have my studio that most people are not allowed in because I don't want them disturbing my stuff. And it's a childhood thing, and it's a freedom to be who you are at any point in your life. For me, from childhood to my incredible old age now, it's just like, it's been, play is so much a part of being a puppeteer. To find that place, to find the story, to find how you're telling the story. It's all play for me.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Gildwen.
Can you repeat the question in France?
En français?
Oh, yes,
please. Colette a noté que malgré les différences entre les 4 spectacles, qu'il y avait un thème du jeu, particulièrement le jeu comme on l'expérimente dans l'enfance. Et elle a voulu savoir quelle est la place du jeu dans votre processus de création et dans la vie des adultes.
Alors, pour moi, c'est vrai que il y a vraiment un lien avec à la fois l'adulte qui raconte des histoires et l'enfant qui se souvient de comment il faisait pour se raconter des histoires.
Okay, so Gildwen says that for me there is a relationship between the adult who is telling the story and the child who, and remembering the child who told himself stories.
Et dans mon spectacle, j'ai des objets de mon enfance.
In my show, there are objects from my childhood, some of your toys.
Yeah. Ouais.
Yes, great. Choiti?
I mean, of course, there is a very clear connection between doll play and childhood. Particularly when I'm taking workshops, teaching object theater to mostly people in India who have never even heard or seen of the word. It's still very, very new in the world, and of course in India we are the only company, and we are only barely 12 years old, so it's not a very, very long journey. To first-time practitioners who are under training, to try and tell them, always the workshop will end with, what is the difference between child play and object theater? The workshop will always end with this question. It's not always answered in the workshops. But this question, in my context, becomes very important because there is an element in child play where anything goes, where you're playing for yourself, but when you are now playing for somebody else, when it converts from drama to theater, there are codes and there are communications that have to be established and communicated and perceived and agreed upon. There is a difference, and I don't want to, I don't want to articulate the difference differences, because then it sort of gets into the area of, oh, the rules of object theater. I don't want to do that. But there is a connection and there is a distinction between child play and object theater.
So Alex, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, sure. Gosh. I was doing a workshop yesterday, which is like a really lovely opportunity to get to come here and lead a workshop as well. But I think one of the things that we were looking at there was just working really simply with miniatures. And I think we had a little model that was one bit of card, 3 small plastic figures, and a little bit of light. And then we just sort of talked about what the story of that image was. And there was maybe 12, 13 different versions of what that image was and what the story behind it was. So I think what really fascinates me about the potential for play in working with figures is how little we need for our imagination to run, for our sense of story to build, to leap. And I think that must come from childhood and kind of like the kind of play we perform as young people. But I think being given the license to hold on to that in later life is where so many sort of interesting points of discussion and idea and dialogue starts from, is just having the time to take your own internal world and have something in front of you that captures that. There's something about a miniature and the kind of beautiful world that it captures in itself that sort of cements something that's in your internal imagined world as well, that the correlation between the two. So yeah, I think that's why I really enjoy them as a really good mirror, a lens for helping us talk about things that might be really difficult to express in words, but which we feel really easily in our heart. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So is Claudia Orenstein still in the house? Where are you, Claudia? So I hope that we've been doing your work justice, and I was wondering if you had any comments or interjections on the conversation that we've been having so far. Okay. So this is our eminent scholar.
Thank you. I'll try and be eminent. First of all, thank you. I've just been absorbing, because it's so beautiful to hear you all talk. And I really have to say how much I appreciate how thoughtful and deeply felt and the understanding you bring to all of this work, and how generously you offer that and share it. I'll just say that, like, some artists, maybe in other fields that I listen to, don't, feel like, well, it's just all there in the work, and aren't interested in talking about it. And I think the talking about it is so enlightening and a kind of partnership. I think everything you've said, resonates with the things I've said in the book are just responding really to what I've seen puppeteers doing, and how you're using materials and all of those qualities you've been talking about to express meaning. And sometimes it's hard to unpack that. It's like we watch a moment and we're having all these emotions because we're seeing materials in action, and maybe there's the performer, they're not present, or they are making themselves present, or the light, all of the elements you've talked about, and everything is being captured in that depth in that moment. It's hard to also unpack that. Like, people are experiencing that and they want to discuss it and think about it, and to unpack what are all those things that are working on me, and you are all dealing with that in such detail. I've really been responding this week in this panel and in the last panel too to the importance of nature. And we're always talking about material and puppetry, and then this material about where it comes from and the materiality of it, and these distinctions that we try and make between human and object and material and earth, and how those are a dial. That's a dial, and there's this deep relationship that puppetry can really capture and connect with. If there's a next book project, that's the one. I feel like I want to capture all your words and have you, have it somewhere we can go back to it, because everything you've said has been so enlightening, I will say, about all those realms and those relationships. So I don't know if that's a good response.
Oh, yes, thank you for indulging us. We put you on the spot. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Good, please, yes. No, we have time for many other questions, so.
Yeah, I was curious. We're seeing very obviously finished and very rehearsed pieces. And as an artist myself, I'm always really interested in process. And I don't perform in the way that you, and I'm just curious about how you get to the point where you have tried something a million ways. How do you get to say, this is the way I should end up, juxtaposing the image with object, or saying this thing at this particular time with this puppet? Yeah, is there any way you can share a moment from your process of making, where you had this you had maybe one idea and then this ended up being the better idea, or anything? Is there anything you can share about process, I guess? That's my question.
Vous avez compris?
I will speak in French. It's more easier for me. Dans le cadre je l'explique à la fin de mon spectacle I Kill the Monster.
As I say at the end of my show, I Killed the Monster.
Le processus a été un peu étonnant, puisque en fait c'est une commande qu'on m'a fait.
The process was a bit surprising because of the command was a commission.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a commission.
Pour un festival, et il y avait un thème imposé.
So there was a theme proposed.
Oui, une chanson.
A song.
Dont il fallait s'inspirer.
From which the show had to be inspired.
Et heureusement, avant, j'avais fait un long travail, un long workshop.
Fortunately, I had done another workshop.
Et dans ce cadre-là, je me suis appuyé sur tout ce que j'avais pu voir ou faire dans ce workshop.
And so in this case, I was able to draw on everything that I had done in the workshop.
Et j'ai composé. J'avais des images de théâtre d'objets que je trouvais performantes, intéressantes à voir.
And I had ideas of object theater that I found compelling.
Et j'ai finalement créé un puzzle en fonction d'une histoire que je vais être un monstre, ou qu'est-ce qu'un monstre aujourd'hui.
And so I then pulled them together to make this piece about what is a monster today.
Donc j'ai fait un grand puzzle.
A composite.
Et ce qui est drôle, c'est qu'il me manquait le personnage principal.
I didn't have a main character.
Et là, je l'ai cherché. J'ai cherché quel objet pouvait représenter ce personnage principal.
So I had to search for the object that could represent this main character.
C'est comme ça que j'ai fait pour ce spectacle-là.
And so that was the process for this show.
We were a more traditional process of putting a show together. We had our script done, and we had read-throughs, and we experimented with several different types of puppets that would work. And mostly it was, once we got there, we just did a very intense week-long workshop, 8 days, I think, and we put the show on its feet and ran it through every single day we were working. But it is a winnowing process. When you see it, you know this is working or it's not, and you just go, we have to get rid. I love this idea, but it's got to go. It's just not fitting within the context of what I'm trying to say, or it just doesn't look right. It looks odd or weird. And then the other thing is you have an audience, and the first time you show it to an audience and something that you thought's really gonna sell it, and it falls flat, and nobody understands what you're saying, you go, okay, that's got to go. Let's see what we can do with that. So that process is kind of always ongoing. I think every time the show is performed before an audience, for me, I pick up things that, okay, this works really well, let's do this again exactly. And it's like, well, that's minimal, let's lose that. We don't have to do that again. I think it is an ongoing process. For me, the show is a living, breathing thing. It's continuing to grow constantly, and the audience helps us in that process of getting to where we're getting the perfect show. Well, I don't think you ever do, but working towards a better communicated story is ultimately what we do, and it's the audience that helps us every time.
Because our show emerged from a very long research period, a big struggle was what to keep and what not to keep. How do you sift through the mountains of research material that you have generated? We didn't start with the script, we started with the flow chart. And so it's what we call, so we created a washing line, and which thankfully the walls of our studio are magnetized. So you can change the washing line around, you can put the first scene in the third scene, and that really just did happen. The climax of the show now, what really binds the play together used to be the third scene. So basically in the second draft of the show, very quickly we had a peak and then we didn't know where to go. And so the magnetized wall helped, where we changed the washing line around. There was the creation of this show was interesting because we did have a playwright on board. And we did have Shamim and I. Shamim is the co-director of the show. He performs the Hindi version of Feeding Each Other. So the washing line was the starting point, and we would play with the material and with the dolls, and Manjima, the playwright, would write, and the two would inform each other. So there were many drafts. There continue to be drafts. There is, apart from this one scene, the climactic scene that I was telling you about, there is this another scene that we have been struggling with immensely, and we continue to struggle with it. Because it's sort of like a blur in our research. It's not an experience that we saw directly, it's an experience that we heard of. But it's an important reality of the region now, it's an important reality of the world now. So it has to be in the play. But the scene has to be imagined. And because it's imagined, it also has to be presented to the audience with a suggestion. It cannot be directly shown. So what we are going to perform here in Chicago of that scene now is, we haven't performed that scene that way before. It will be the Chicago premiere. We'll find out on the 21st how it works. So yeah, it's been a combination of on floor and on paper feeding each other, with the material really being dominant in informing the journey.
Maybe I have one thought that's useful. I don't know, maybe. It was something someone once said to me. Create the conditions for it to be okay for you to fail. I think that's a really that's a big, I sometimes wonder if I should even write it up on the wall in our room where we make things. Having space and time to make lots and lots of mistakes, to try lots and lots of different things, to try it 1,001 different ways, to really explore all the different angles of something, so that with each time you can take that little step closer to understanding the thing that you're making, what it's really trying to say, and the way that it really connects with the audience who you're sharing it with, who you're sharing that moment with, that space with. So, and it might sound easy, but it's not. It's really hard to go through a process where you feel like you are constantly failing in some way. It takes a huge amount of resilience, and I think a lot of it is about having people around you who really understand that process as well, and where you all have a real sense of trust in each other, like building that trust of, okay, we're going to get this wrong. Let's go for it. And yeah, we got it wrong. Great. Okay, so how did we get it wrong? Let's talk about that. Finding that kind of openness and connection with each other in the group of people that you make with is really important. I think everything I've ever made is a collective effort. I'm a really strong proponent of collective making. I don't buy into the image of like auteur artistic genius. That doesn't exist in my head as the way that I see the world for me. So yeah, but creating safe conditions to fail in good places, so that when you're ready to come and share it with other people, you've got that confidence that you've done that work already and you've explored all of that aspect of things. Yeah.
The motto of the O'Neill Theater Center, where we do the National Puppetry Conference, is risk, fail, risk again. And that we live by that motto all through the 2 weeks that we're there. So.
Quickly add something? Yes. I just want to augment the teamwork that he was talking about, because we had so many people who were working together on the research aspect of it. When we entered the rehearsal space, there was already a lot of people on board who had a very deep understanding of what the play was, of the context that the play was going to emerge from. And so we had plenty of trustworthy outside eyes as well, apart from the writer and the people who are going to write on paper, who are going to write on stage. We had trustworthy outside eyes. This was very, very helpful. I mean, so after a very long time, the burden of creating a show was not on one person. It was a huge relief.
Great. And I'm delighted to see we have another question coming from the floor.
Thank you all for being here. Yeah, I love the stuff about teamwork and failure. That feels good to hear. You talk about process, and one thing I was wondering about all of your shows is in terms of technical challenges. I think sometimes you see a show and the audience is appreciating what they're seeing, but there may be a technical aspect of it that you as the artists and creators had to do a ton of troubleshooting on, and or like it was just a very challenging aspect that maybe is not something that is seen at face value when you're just an audience member. And I'm interested to hear, like, what is the one thing about your show where, you know, you're like, oh, it was super hard to source clay in this spot, or, you know, the drawer was very difficult to make it open, or, you know, you talked about trying to have the backs of the elephants and that didn't work. I hear there's a treadmill in your show. Like, I just want to know what the one technical thing is where you're like, the audience doesn't even know, but that was so hard and we did it.
Vous l'avez saisi? OK. Il voudrait savoir quelle était la plus grande difficulté technique pour monter le spectacle. Est-ce que c'était l'éclairage ou le mécanisme?
Je vais répondre. Dans le cadre du spectacle I Kill the Monster, j'ai voulu faire les choses le plus simplement possible.
So in I Killed the Monster, I wanted to do things as simply as possible.
Et heureusement, j'ai trouvé une raison dramaturgique à ça.
Fortunately, I found dramaturgical reasons for those choices.
Parce que c'est, on découvre qui est finalement celui qui nous raconte l'histoire, et celui, je ne vais pas dévoiler, mais il y a un lien entre le personnage, l'histoire et la scénographie.
So there's, encore une fois.
Il y a un lien entre le personnage, l'histoire et la scénographie.
There is a connection between the character, the story, and the setting.
Et mon idée, c'était que finalement, c'est comme si quelqu'un ne fait jamais de théâtre et il doit construire un décor.
So I wanted to make a set that looked like it was made by someone who never does theater.
C'est facile.
That was easy.
Mais du coup, pour moi, il n'y a pas de choses compliquées. Même si les enfants souvent pensent que c'est compliqué.
Okay, so for me there was nothing complicated, even though children sometimes think that it is complicated or complex.
Par exemple, sur la lumière, j'ai décidé de ne pas utiliser de dimmer pack pour créer, mais simplement de toucher la lumière avec mes mains, et c'est moi qui la baisse.
Okay, And so he decided not to have a dimmer switchboard, but just to raise or lower the light himself. C'est tout?
Oui.
Okay, so that's.
I think what the audience probably doesn't appreciate, I have a tremendously wonderful cast. They are so talented and so creative. But the backstage traffic of what is going on to get those giant elephants at the end, there's just a giant elephant that comes out, between paging curtains, making sure you don't bump into anybody, and wearing hoods backstage where it's dark to see what you're doing. That was really challenging for all of us to figure out together to get people on and off at the right time. Plus, they are also moving all the sets. You know, every time we have a set change, not only are they puppeteering, but they're making sure they're putting the right twisted up bush in the right little thing, which is they look alike in the dark from backstage. So I think, yeah, the tricky part for us was really backstage traffic is tremendously complicated.
Firstly, thank you for this question. Clay is not hard to source anywhere at all. It's an omnipresent material. What is terrifying is the texture of the clay on the day of the show. It has to have the right amount of moisture. It can't be too soft, it can't be too dry, which also depends on what the weather is like that day and what temperature is the heating at in the room. So I'm actually, because the heating is drying my throat, so I'm terrified that it's going to dry the clay, which means I can't mold it. So that is something that we have to be very mindful of. And the second unexpected realization is that at the end of the show, we have a rotating turntable. And India functions on 220 volts, whereas America functions on 110 volts. So we will see how that rotation goes. Yeah, and feel free to stay back after the show to help us clean the clay.
So I guess this question is a little bit like therapy. And being able to so thank you. It's a really great opportunity. I think part of, sometimes the thing that really interests me is taking something that's technically really, really complicated, but the end effect that comes from it feels really elegant and simple. Achieving simplicity is very, very hard. The lightbox table that's in Concerned Others, so that's driven by LED pixel tape. So there's technically 3,000 channels of lighting in that one table piece that each channel can be individually controlled and animated. So there's a huge series of tools there to work with, but we gave ourselves that amount of option to then use it to do something that felt really simple and really, really elegant. We have a lot of different animation techniques in the piece. We use a phonotrope, which is, a few people, I'm sure, will be very, very skilled and know lots about. And it's kind of a contemporary riff on a zoetrope, that sort of classic animation of the horse running in a circle. The science of that, the maths of that should be consistent. It's not. It's really, really not. Every time we turn a camera on, it seems to want to do something different. So there's always a process of translating to the space and infrastructure that you're moving into. Yeah, different power. We blew a fuse when we were setting up. That was, it sort of sounded like that. It was very dramatic. So yes, but I think in general, taking complex palettes of tools and using them to achieve really simple things, yeah, that's a thing. You can get. I also really value how beautiful the simplicity is of being able to control those elements yourself. I think that's beautiful. We just went to the other end of the dial and went really complicated. And maybe the next project will turn the dial back right the other way. We'll see.
Uncle?
Je retourne le compliment. Je dis qu'aussi c'est très courageux de faire des spectacles avec une technique et que ça fonctionne au final.
So, Gildwen is returning the compliment and acknowledging that it's very difficult to do a show that uses so much technical.
Et mon expérience par rapport à ça, c'est que le spectacle d'avant, il y avait beaucoup de techniques. Et pour essayer une idée, des fois, ça prenait 1 ou 2 journées. Et des fois, on était obligé d'abandonner cette idée-là. Et je trouvais ça très dur.
Okay, so he had the experience of a previous show where there was a lot of technical devices used to produce this one idea, and they worked on it for several days, and in the end they had to give it up, which was painful because it just didn't work.
Et quand j'ai créé j'ai découvert avec le théâtre d'objets qu'on pouvait en 1 heure essayer quelque chose, et ça c'était très stimulant pour moi au niveau intellectuel et créatif.
So he found that with object theater, you could try something out in just an hour, and that was more stimulating intellectually and creatively. Yes, please.
I have a question looking on these 2 names, humans and objects. We always had some kind of borders, ethical and technical, with the humans. But my question is, do we have borders, ethical borders towards to objects and materials?
Oh, okay, that's the object-oriented ontology question, which we have addressed in previous years of the symposium. But what if I think what you're asking is, what if we flipped the perspective and try to look at the world from the point of view of the object rather than the human perspective? I think that Aanika's Elephants does this to some extent because we are brought into the elephant society.
Yes, our intention was to show that anything can be a family is one of the taglines from us. So our object, our elephants, became the family that adopted the little girl as opposed to humans adopting elephants. That was the overriding feeling, is that both elephants, all animals and all humans are part of one big family on this earth. We all live together here. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the limitation of the object, it's an interesting question, right? Because viewing it, are you saying, do we view it as a piece of rattan, bending to the will of humans, and how does that rattan feel? I mean, I can take it all the way to what the material is going through as the object, or as the elephants looking at the rest of the world, and how they are relating to what's going on with everyone. Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting, challenging question. I don't quite know where to go with that.
Aanika's Elephants, it introduces things that I think most of the audience doesn't know about elephants. So I learned, for example, that they are matriarchal. I learned that they mourn their dead. And I learned that they put their trunks in each other's mouths as a sign of affection. There's a device in the script that really helps the audience bridge that horizon of expectation instead of looking at things from our human perspective, and that's the persona of the 8-year-old girl. And so her reaction to things like, ew, you picked up elephant poo with your hands, as Aanika's telling the story, a lot of the audience would feel that way too. But then Aanika has a logical response that invites the audience to open their minds to this other way of seeing. Is this an answer, a good answer to your? It is, yeah. Okay. Do the other performers have some
Just let me credit Annie Evans for that device. She wrote a brilliant show that I was lucky enough to direct. And then our performer handles that transition. She becomes an 8-year-old girl, an 8-year-old American girl from a Kenyan 12-year-old girl in the process of the show all the time. So,
yeah. So that's a dramaturgical choice that worked. Okay. Do the other panelists have thoughts about, once again, I'm going to call it the object-oriented ontology perspective, where we have to be metaphorical and metaphysical, because our own human consciousness, we can't step outside of our own way of apprehending things. So we are projecting or imagining when we try to enter into the way that material may experience the world. But we'll put it out there. Where are those gummy bears that Matt had? Maybe we need some of those to answer this question. He didn't bring the fun ones, but.
I don't know if I might add something that might maybe just, I don't know. Maybe I'm going to say it in French first because it's directed to Gildwen. Tu nous as dit qu'il y avait certains de tes objets choisis dans le spectacle qui faisaient partie des objets de ton enfance. Donc, pourquoi ce choix-là? Est-ce que c'était juste pour le plaisir d'avoir ces objets-là dans ton spectacle? Ou est-ce qu'il y avait une raison, justement, peut-être en lien avec la question de monsieur, plus profonde que ça, pour les intégrer dans ce spectacle-là, spécifiquement?
Okay.
I don't know if you want to translate
Can
that?
Please,
Or,
you want me to? Or are you going to?
Well, I wanted to ask, because he said before that some of the objects he uses in his show are from his childhood. So I was wondering if it's like a specific choice, like if there's a reason to it, like a deep reason to it, that maybe resonate with his question, or if it's just for pleasure.
Je crois que c'est finalement par hasard que ces objets-là sont revenus.
Okay. I think it's basically just by chance that those objects came back to me.
Mais ça me fait plaisir que ce soit des objets de mon enfance, certains qui reviennent.
But it gives me pleasure that some of those childhood objects came back to me.
En fait, je fonctionne en récupérant beaucoup d'objets et j'accumule, j'ai des caisses et des caisses et des caisses d'objets.
So he accumulates objects, he has bins and bins of them.
Et une partie des objets premiers, ce sont ceux que j'ai déménagés. Et plutôt que de mettre à la poubelle les objets d'enfance, je me suis dit, tiens, je vais les garder, ça pourra servir un jour.
And so part of the origin of the collection is that as he was moving house, instead of throwing away these childhood objects, he kept them thinking that he would find a use for them someday.
Et dans le travail, c'est une alternance entre des objets à partir desquels on va inventer une histoire, et de l'autre côté, on a une histoire et il faut qu'on trouve les objets.
Okay, so sometimes the object has a story, and sometimes he has a story, and then he has to find the right object for the story. We're right at time. Does anybody have a burning interjection before we close it out? No? Okay, thank you very much, audience, for coming. And thanks to all of our wonderful panelists.